You're listening to All Things Astrology, a conversation with Isha Lerner and Mark Lerner. This conversation is sponsored by 4Fame Smash, a new music compression, storage, and text messaging app. Check it out and download it free at 4famesmash.com.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to, mention here that we're redoing something that we did last night, and it was really full of great information, and I really appreciate you, Mark, willing to do this again after I had made that error and it didn't record. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm ready.
So what I want to say, though, before I begin, just like I did last night, that, I'm just really grateful that you're willing to share information, with everybody with me. And, how we've been doing this work for 40 plus years together, and that you wear many hats in my life. Ex-husband, best friend, person who has raised two beautiful daughters together and shared the same work, astrology, tarot, archetype, and everything else. And also just want to mention that I so respect you as a mentor and a teacher, and so looking forward to going over a lot of what we have to look at, for the remainder of this year, and as we move into 2021, what we might be expecting, especially as we in the United States begin to look at the beginning of a new administration and inauguration, and basically a change of consciousness, all the way around. So I just, want to ask you, Mark, to maybe start us off on that. Like, I think what's really important for us to look at is, first, what are we looking at the rest of December? Because there's a lot going on in January that we, want to go through. But, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction coming, and just, any advice. And also, can you talk about that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius?
Oh, sure. And the feelings are mutual, and all our love together, and for daughters and grandchildren and the wider community, the planet as a whole, everything that we started learning together at Findhorn back 40 plus years ago now. It seems like yesterday.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is you and I actually, a long time ago, went around the country sharing about the next 20 years, which was at a time when Jupiter and Saturn last came together, which wound up being May 28th of 2000. And we were actually doing that during a previous Jupiter-Saturn cycle back in 1980 and 81, when Jupiter and Saturn were in Libra 3 times. That was a kind of anomalous conjunction in air signs, because we had been having Jupiter and Saturn in Earth signs from 1842. And everyone knows, I think, now that on the winter solstice on December 21, coming up here shortly, we will have Jupiter and Saturn merge together in Aquarius at the very beginning, and that starts actually approximately 180 degrees. This is what's kind of a wave into air signs every 20 years. And the astrologers back thousands of years ago, all the way back to Mesopotamia, they were recording the Jupiter-Saturn cycles that occur every 20 years. But this one, visually, for people who will be able to see it when they have clear skies in the evening, just before December 21, as they're almost about to get together on that day, and quite a bit after for several days, depending on viewing, binoculars, telescope, it'll look like a major kind of star shining, and it's actually both Jupiter and Saturn reflecting the sun's light. And they come together every 20 years, but they don't always come together as closely. And since it is Aquarius, and the idea of the dawning of Aquarius is it'll be pretty spectacular.
Wow. And I don't know, there just seems to be something so uplifting and awakening about Saturn and Jupiter moving into Aquarius. And, when we were also excited about moving into 2020, I remember I was, and I remember that so many people were like, yeah, 2019, I'm over with it, 2020. And then, whoa, we had a lot,
right.
A lot of metaphor around that 2020 now, and a lot to look back on. We talked about, and I think it's really interesting, the archetypal energy as we move into a new level of, I don't like to overuse the word awakening, but to actually, with the Aquarian, Uranian energy, with the Saturn, the world, and the Jupiter, the Wheel of Fortune, and Aquarius being, the star card, actually, and also the Uranian energy connected to the Fool. These are some pretty beautiful archetypes to work with as we complete the year and, in a sense, wish upon a star.
Right.
Understand that we are moving into this Wheel of Fortune template where new opportunities will come about. And also, I think, that level of expansion, that restlessness, and that feeling that we all want to get back out there and travel and, have an active life again as it relates to community, because also Aquarius is so connected to community and sisterhood and brotherhood. So in a sense, it's really interesting, as we move into December, and I think it's actually mid-December when they move in there, but then they become exact, as you mentioned, when they're bright in the sky later in the month. And then we sort of, finish out the year with this grand vision of light in the sky, kind of like the wishing upon that star. I want to challenge us all to wish upon a star to some extent and prepare for January. So let's look at that Mars moving then into Taurus, conjoining Uranus. Can you tell us about that? Because I think that's a really big story coming up in January.
Right. So Mars has been retrograding a lot. Now it's direct again, but it's spent from around September 9th to November during the actual election in the United States. We had Mars retrograde, which is very unusual. It doesn't happen all the time. So now Mars is going to go into Taurus on January 6th. And then what will happen is the conjunction with Uranus will be right after the inauguration on January 20th. That afternoon on the East Coast, Mars-Uranus will come together. And they only come together about every 2+ years. Uranus has an 84-year cycle. Uranus has a cycle of 2+ years. So every 2+ years, wherever Uranus is, Mars will be with it. But what are the odds that it would be together on the day of an inauguration, exactly on that day, which is a highly unusual one, particularly because we will have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and that brings in the feminine energies, which are also Taurus, as the first feminine sign of the zodiac, at least traditionally after Aries.
Right. But, Mark, do they come together, though, first January 9th, or is it that Mars just moves into Taurus?
January 6th, Wednesday, January 6th, Mars goes into Taurus. Now, Uranus has been there for a number of years,
right?
And it's very slow in motion due to things like direct and retrograde motion. Particularly in January, Uranus is not really moving anywhere. But as you were bringing up, the catalyst for all this is Mars adds all this energy, and it's been staying extra long in Aries, its own sign. And suddenly it goes into Taurus, which is more of the feminine and the grounding energy of what Mars has been sort of energizing for several months while in fire sign, goes into Taurus, approaches Uranus, hits Uranus exactly as we have this unique, at least in the United States and affecting, of course, the world internationally, the oldest president we will ever have inaugurated, and the first woman to occupy either the presidency or the vice presidency, which is historic. And so the Mars and Uranus will be together, and traditionally both of those are more related to male-type archetypes, but they're in the first feminine sign of the zodiac, which is astounding. And then as we shared the other day, and we'll, I guess, share again now, then the moon, which is in a quarter moon phase with the sun and moon on January 20th on that inauguration day, goes from Aries, a void moon, into Taurus, and will make these conjunctions with Mars and Uranus in the next 24 hours thereafter. And the moon is the main feminine archetype in astrology.
Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing that the moon will conjunct Uranus and Mars right at the day after the inauguration, which in a way, I would say accelerates or magnifies in a way the feminine archetype, the warrioress energy of the feminine. And remember how right after the election of 2016, there were the marches of women, that were just filling the
Right.
world. I imagine we'll see something similar with the Mars-Uranus energy squaring Jupiter. And this time it may be a bit more of a radical call, especially as we know what's going on. I don't even want to name the name of some of the dissonance that's happening in the world, but we know what's going on. After the inauguration, I would imagine with this aspect that there's going to be a great movement of energy, and we don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but it's going to affect, I think, the emotional body of the world. And, it's not, because again, we're not just talking about the United States. And I think it's, a little bit, sort of egocentric, to just look at this from the perspective of the United States. This is a world connection.
Right.
And so really what is being called upon humanity, I mean, everything you're saying is so important for sure as we look at the world stage as it relates to the United States. But also as we look at the world stage with, the moon, Mars, Uranus square Jupiter, something really deep and big wants to happen to in a way rebel against the old value system. And don't you think, being it's Taurus and it's connected into Aquarius and Uranus, what are the old values that really must come down? And I think one of the things, that we did talk about together was in the karmic imprint work that, I've done and you have too, and that we've talked a lot about. Saturn, Uranus together, or any type of Saturnian, Uranian, Mars, Saturn aspects, these types of things, these type of aspects on a karmic level in an individual's chart create an absolute must for breaking old patterns in this lifetime and to release and free and unlock, you might say, the rigid patterns of the past and unlink, from the limitations of the past.
Right.
And so as we now move into January, you were mentioning to me about the Saturn-Uranus square that will be happening 3 times in 2021. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's really a key point for the year.
Right. And before we do that, and continuing with what you just said, the last time when we didn't actually record, we had mentioned about 2020 is like a double judgment card with the number 20 of major sun, which is connected often to Pluto. And we certainly all know, whether it's affected us directly, certainly of our loved ones and friends and what's plaguing the planet as we, dealing with this crisis with health, that nobody ever imagined we would go into a year like this. And we're all looking favorably at, or hopefully for 2021, which is the world number. We go from 2020 to 2021, which is the world card. And of course, that brings us back to the idea that in the majors, the last card, the world, which we have made with the inner child cards into the child rather than some of the traditional imagery, that's the Saturnian card, and the Fool, which is the beginning. If we think of it as a circle rather than quantitative numbers from 0 to then 1 to 21, but as a cycle, then Uranus and Saturn are completely connected, which is exactly what you're bringing up. And Saturn, it's so fascinating to realize that for centuries, or for like as long as you could go back before the discovery of Uranus in 1781, the ancients and astronomers, astrologers thought there's nothing beyond Saturn, and Saturn was the last planet, and after that were what they called the fixed stars, which they thought never moved, which they actually do move, but they didn't have the telescopes. And then we discover Uranus, which in many ways, instead of Jupiter and Saturn always being hope and fear or optimism, pessimism, that they were always seen as opposites, and now they're more complementary, 2 parts of one whole, whereas the Saturnian structure of life is broken through by the Uranian energy and then eventually Neptune, Pluto, these other outer planets. And we have to re-understand the meanings of these planets. And it's a perfect time with Jupiter and Saturn coming together in an air sign for the next about 180 years, And at the same time, what we will have is this challenge, as you mentioned. February 17 is the first date when Saturn-Uranus square with Saturn in Aquarius. And remember, Saturn used to rule Aquarius, according to traditional astrology, as well as Capricorn. And then Uranus took that over, and Uranus in Taurus. And then they'll repeat, oddly enough, on Flag Day in the U.S., June 14th, which is significant for other reasons. By retrograde Saturn, they'll make a second square. And then, oddly enough, on Christmas Eve of next year, Saturn and Uranus will make the third of these three very monumental squares, as you're saying, kind of where are we going from past to future?
Yeah. And, if we look again at archetypes, Saturn, the world, as we talked about, and in the inner child cards, which, by the way, Mark Lerner is the co-author of Inner Child Cards. We did those together many, many years ago. But we created the child, the reincarnation, the evolution of humanity as it relates to fulfilling, in a sense, a portion of a destiny. And each time we reach the world card, there's a potential for a kind of joy. And that's the irony about Saturn, because the world card is ruled by Saturn, and yet the world card is joyous. And so I was always very, adamant to learn more about that. And that's what started my interest in karmic imprint work. But to look at the Saturn, again, which is the world, or the evolving child within, or that part of ourself that seeks to retrieve the treasure that we were birthed with, as it squares Uranus, which of course we know is the Fool card. And so here we have a Saturn, a world Fool square. I don't know, that just seems really powerful and amazing. And the fact that these Capricorn planets in 2020 have all moved now over into the Aquarian sector, and also with the Taurian energy, we're looking at what's new and what is, and how do we reframe the value system.
Right.
And, the Capricorn energy, it shows up a lot during the new moon, which happens before the inauguration, which you informed me about, actually, which is super interesting, that the new moon happens to conjoin Pluto right before the inauguration.
Yes.
And so we're finishing a Saturnian energy. Capricorn. We're finishing the Capricornian journey, in a sense, and a grand finale with Pluto to go through this incredible transformation. And so, again, we were talking about that and looking at the Sabian symbol for, for that new moon is a woman entering a convent. And the keynote is total commitment to a transcendent goal. It's really powerful. Dane Rudyard and the astrological mandala, and you and I have worked extensively with the Sabian symbols and continue to find them fascinating and so significant, as it relates to each degree of the zodiac. And so at the new moon degree, at 24 degrees Capricorn, we have this incredible thing that says a convent is a place made available by a community which believes in the possibility of reaching a world transcending state of consciousness. It is made available to individuals who may be variously motivated, to some to escape, others to find release in intolerable pressures. And the keynote is transcendent security. So we talked, think about that. Pluto, and the 2020 and the world Capricorn. Wow, this just seems like a powerful new moon that prepares us for what is yet to come.
Yeah, you just shared an astounding bit of reality that we're about to have the week before the inauguration. Like you said, is this new moon, Sun with Pluto, and interestingly, Mars and Saturn are actually square. There's very often when you look at all the details of every day, having done this for now, 39 years in the cosmic calendar, you find all these, it's almost as if, why is the universe and the spiritual forces, angels and teachers from the other side, it's as if like, oh, by the way, here's what we're also going to, here's a new moon, it's going to be significant, we're just going to make the Sun and Pluto come together. Well, guess what? A year before this, if you go back to January 2020, you go back to all the news, even in the astrology field, everybody was saying, oh my God, Saturn and Pluto are coming together. That was a year ago. And if you go back to January 13th, the same day that we're going to have this new moon, in 2020, the year we're still in, we had Sun conjunct Pluto. I'm just looking here right now. Ceres, the largest asteroid, conjunct Pluto and Saturn. This is all on the 13th of this year. Sun conjunct Saturn, Sun conjunct Ceres, and the day before was Saturn conjunct Pluto. And astrologers were looking at that date. We had the whole thing happening through China, and we didn't know what was going to happen. Now we know what has unfolded, and now we're trying to give birth to a new year. And one of the things, Isha, that's really fascinating that was brought up in different kind of subject matter that I've studied over the years, and you and I talked about this years ago because working with our charts, our children, and other astrology we've both done, is that Pluto, if you take the solar system going outward, inward, instead of the normal view, we have the sun, then we get Mercury, Venus, we get the Earth and the moon, and so on. You start with Pluto. Pluto represents conception, like the conception of a child. Neptune represents the 9 months of gestation of the child, and Uranus represents birth. And we do want to, I think we didn't, when we shared the other day, and it didn't record, we sort of forgot Neptune. So let's add Neptune just to make sure. Here's the amazing thing about Neptune. 2 things. I mean, out of 1,000. The first aspect of the new year, the first main aspect, we'll have a Leo moon, which you know very well. We'll have the moon in Leo on December 31 as we go into the doorway of the new year. And Mercury and Neptune will make what we call a sextile, 60 degrees. Mercury will still be in Capricorn before it gets into Aquarius later in the month. And I know we'll talk about that in a few minutes, Mercury in Aquarius. But Mercury will make a 60-degree link to Neptune. That starts off the year. The first main planetary alignment is an imaginative and sort of the power of the mind linking up to creative imagination, gestating these new ideas of what we're talking about in the sharing.
Yeah, that's, and I think that's such a good point too, because we've got to remember the magic and the imagination, the intuition, and to bring it down to, grounding cosmic energy, in a sense. How are we, in a sense, walking stars, living stars, in this natural world? And to remember that we have so many aspects along with these challenging ones that we tend to, pinpoint, just like we do in our natal chart, because, we push at them kind of like the diamond in the rough, and we grow through them and we evolve. But to remember that there's so much beauty in between, and that, I just love what you said, because I really want to focus on that in the beginning of the year, that there's a Neptune-Mercury trine, and that we can enlighten, in a sense, a part of a great wish, because we learned at Cintorn, to visualize and to manifest is a very important pairing, that needs focus. But again, as we move then into January and, again, like you're saying, we have the new moon, and then we have Mercury moving into Aquarius, which again is Uranian, so it's just so much pointing toward this point of renewal, community, rebellion, individuation, the process to call upon the age of Aquarius, maybe it isn't the big age of Aquarius on a big glorious level. I don't want to glamorize, but there's something pretty powerful about this Aquarian energy. And then after the inauguration, and as you mentioned, there's this incredible moon in Taurus that conjoins Uranus and Mars, and there's this combustion that squaring Jupiter. There's this energy that wants to happen. Flip side, good side, bad side, or challenging side, precious side. It's going to be both, But what happens is we hit a full moon, right? After the inauguration, and we have this magical Sabian symbol. So once we, have gone through so many of these sort of different of course, it takes a whole process to understand what these cycles and these aspects, how they will truly impact a humanity, but they do hint, and they poke, and they push, and we feel them. and the full moon comes then. Is it, what is the date again? Is it the 28th?
Yeah, January 28th.
Right. And so the Sabian symbol for that is early morning dew sparkles as sunlight floods the field. Oh, and of course, as you mentioned, the sun is conjunct Jupiter on that day opposite the moon. And so there, the exalted feeling that rises within the soul of the individual who has successfully passed through the long night, which has tested his strength and faith. And the keynote, transfiguration.
And
pretty cool. It's pretty lovely.
Yeah, that's astounding, beautiful symbol. And as we mentioned the other time, it turns out, oddly enough, this is how the universe or the powers that be give us these amazing links. The new moon of the 13th of January is at a quarter moon for America at this inauguration, and then a week later we get this extraordinary full moon, as you said, Sun and Jupiter together. That can only happen on one day of a calendar year, just happens to occur on a full moon, and Venus conjuncts Pluto on that day, bringing in the feminine with Pluto on January 28th, which rekindles the new moon energy of the 13th. Because in astrology, every new moon is seeking its fulfillment or crescendo at the fullness of the full moon. And of course, in the ancient times, this was like there was a tremendous amount of fear with full moons, mostly when they were eclipsed, not so much when they were actually full, because at a full moon, it brightens up the landscape. You can see all kinds of things. But of course, animals, even plants, respond differently when you have the full moon. You got the tides. But when there would be eclipses, people didn't know why. They didn't understand the science. So this won't be an eclipse or anything. But to have the sun with Jupiter, the two largest celestial bodies in the solar system, exactly together, and this will be 2 days before Mercury slows down to make a station to go retrograde.
Wow. And so, in a sense, that particular full moon on the 28th of January seems to be a point of, it almost feels like a point of illumination. You know, a full moon is always illumination, but a kind of celebratory, acknowledgement that we're moving toward light, in a sense that and this is for anyone, any political party. It's like that humanity is seeking a kind of release from a tension that has been so deeply held. And of course, we hear so much about the divisiveness in the world and the tension that has been created, not only in the United States, but around the world, and different leaders. There's a lot of dissonance that is happening in Great Britain and everywhere else. Japan has issues with China. China has issues with the United States. And it's all kind of still very locked in to an old world dissonance and power struggle. And
yeah. I wanted to just mention, as you're sharing that, remember you had asked me, did we ever have, with the Jupiter-Saturn energies going Aquarius, when was the last time they were ever there? Because, again, sometimes when people do research, they may say, oh, it happened, so many hundred years ago. Well, guess what? The last time it happened was in 1226, 794 years ago. That's this larger cycle of Jupiter-Saturn going first through, if we were to start it at its very beginning in fire signs for, say, 180 years, then they'd go in earth signs for 180 years, and then air signs, and then water signs. So we're just coming out of 180 years from 1842, what you were just saying, Jupiter and Saturn, every 20 years, were in earth signs. And that represented, or has represented, this overgrounding element of banks and, for instance,
the material world.
Yeah, the material values. And by going into air, which is, again, we haven't had this since from 1226 to 1405, those decades, which, by the way, were interesting for many reasons, even with astrology, as many people, unless you've studied it, don't realize that at universities, which were in existence in Europe, astrology in its form at that point, which is kind of a little bit more astronomy, astrology, was taught as one of the main subjects. And between countries and different movements from Africa and the Middle East into Europe. This is how astrology evolved, and that was kind of the pre Renaissance time period. So that's where we're moving. It's like a kind of Renaissance energy starting all over again of Jupiter and Saturn and air signs. The next Jupiter-Saturn will actually be in 60 years from now. There's a particular day it'll be in Aquarius in 2080 in the month of March. The next time Jupiter and Saturn will be in Aquarius. And 20 years from now, they'll be in Libra together. And 40 years from now, they'll be in Gemini. So that's a little of the continuity, kind of this birthing of the age of Aquarius will take quite a while, not just in a year or 10 years or something. I actually did a cover story back on the Welcome to Planet Earth 22 years ago, where the article was about 90 plus years for the dawning of the age of Aquarius, giving this as a kind of beginning, and then looking ahead over the next 60 years of different conjunctions of planetary energies. Pluto will go into Aquarius in 2024 for quite a while, and other planets will go in there periodically. Again, Saturn will go in Aquarius again after this time. Jupiter every 12 years will be back in Aquarius. So we got a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, and I think that what inspires and I think, is tremendously hopeful is the Aquarian community, the vibration of brotherhood, sisterhood, and also it connects into organizations and, new prospects of inventions and the genius within each of us. And that feels so wonderful because on one level, Aquarius being community, but then also Aquarian being individuated and very much, the individual genius and the invention. In a way, it prompts all of us to believe in our own genius, to reach for the stars, which is the star card, Aquarius, and to believe that the world community, the world family will someday drop its borders. I don't think we'll ever see a perfect world, but that we come to understand more and more how we are one world. I just heard a really nice podcast with Mark Kelly, the astronaut who spent a year up in space. Mm-hmm. It was really inspiring, and we've all heard it, but just, it never hurts to be reminded that when they're up there looking down on this jewel of a planet, there are no borders. Right. It's one big family, it's one beautiful planet, and it's vulnerable. And it's just a lovely concept, to realize how lucky we are to be here. Right. And how vulnerable the world is. And yet Earth is a part of these planetary cycles, and we are its inhabitants at this time. We are made of stars. We are, really together able to move mountains and create new value systems in time. And I think that really begins in 2021. Right.
Yeah, this January, there's so much going on that it just feels monumental in terms of how we can all move forward together, like you said, and the ancient god or goddess energy of Janus representing, or Janus, January, like a two-faced or two-headed god, goddess, one looking back, one looking forward. I mean, between this December, Jupiter, Saturn together, winter solstice, and then everything we've been sharing today, and what we will do in the sharing in the future about what's going to happen in January. I think people will look back on January 2021, partly because of everything, all the difficulties of this past year. And it'll be a turning point. It will be an opening to something pretty extraordinary for the rest of the year and far into the future.
Lovely. We are going to do a part 2, and we're going to focus on the inauguration, on Joe Biden's chart, Kamala Harris's chart, the USA chart, and how we can all really prepare and become, you might say, full of faith and hope, and in a sense, making it conscious, know what's going on so that we can help push the energy forward in a positive way.
Yes, totally agree. And lots of love and blessings to everybody out there listening, and our extended family and our friends.
Yeah. So, thank you so much. And until next time, have have a good evening, have a good day, whatever. And lots of love, Mark. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That's it for now. Join us for the next All Things Astrology with Isha Lerner and Mark Lerner. We'll see you next time.